was Green Day who sang Wake Me Up When September Ends. That was in 2005, which was a season of crazy conference realignment, the Bush push, maybe the greatest game ever played, the Rose Bowl. Well, September has ended in 2024, and in only one October weekend, we have already reached 2005 or even 2007 levels of college football chaos. Now we are here to sort through it all. Hey, everybody. This is the College Game Day Podcast for Monday, October 7th. Ryan McGee and Pete Thamel here with you today. A quick reminder, please download the podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or better yet, subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Pete, you were on the West Coast. I was at Texas A&M. Sir, have you been able to process everything that happened on Saturday, and what was it like sitting out there at Berkeley watching the rest of the country rip itself asunder?
It was a pretty amazing day. I think, we need to Berkeley was the perfect bubbling cauldron for the day that unfolded in college football. It was weird. It was wild. It was unexpected. And I think the chaos for our show that morning in Berkeley set the table for the weirdest day ever, which fittingly ended really weird in Berkeley that night. I think before we dive into the day, and I'll get into the Berkeley thing because it was fun now. We need to give a hat tip to our fearless leader, Reese Davis, our typical host. He pulled off the odd 22-hour day on Saturday. So we left the hotel at 3:50 a.m., which means he probably woke up at 3, and then did 3 hours of live television, not easy to do. And then went back that night with some sort of ailment, right? His voice was a little off, as you heard in the podcast. I don't think it was bad, but he was hurting and not feeling great. And did a 4-hour, completely zany, like historic fourth quarter comeback college football game. Yeah, no ditches were dug, so I don't want to get over dramatic about it. But that was a day. That is a long, difficult day for a skilled pro. So that is why Reese is not with us. He is obviously recovering from 7 hours of live television, but a hat tip to our friend. That is a pros pro day.
Yeah, and what I've always said about Reese, and this has been true from the first time I met him, which was 30 years ago, is that he has to be cloned. There's no way that he can do everything that he's doing. You and I both are very, very busy people, and we're very, very fortunate and lucky, and hope the phone keeps ringing. But there's that 1% of this time of year where you're like, there have to be more Reese Davises inside of Laura Rutledge, right? I mean, there have to be there has to be more than one of them because there's no way they can do all the things they're doing. But yeah, I don't know how they keep their voice going because by the way, he hosts 3 podcasts a week, and he does all the things that no one even knows about. And so but West Coast trips are so great. But yeah, kids, you got to get up in the morning to do a show that starts with an AM on it in the East. You got to get up pretty early. And so and I bet he didn't sleep very much on Friday night at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. It was, I'll say this, like we have a lot of we're very blessed to do what we do. There's a lot of early wake up calls, right? When there's a 3 on the alarm clock, it hits different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes all the sense in the world. No,
I can handle a 4. Like I'm leaving this conference where I am, and all the 6 a.m. flight. You get a bit full. That's fine. When there's a 3, it's like disorienting a little bit. Yeah. But that said, man,
and then that's why we love fall back. Like everybody talks about the clock, we all love fall back when it hits here in a couple of weeks because I just back in the NASCAR days, I always felt like I was on the West Coast, when it was time to spring forward. And I'm not a morning person, Pete, even though I co-host a morning show on SEC Network. But what a weekend. And it started early and it stayed that way, like you say, until a lot of the East Coast we were all trying to stay awake. And but it was, listen, we're going to start at a place where people stay up late all the time and never get up early, and that's Nashville. And and that was, so we have a group text of all the ESPN.com writers, and I had sent Jokey Taylor, and the text from Mark Schlabach suddenly went out that said, somebody needs to get to Nashville. And that was honestly the first time that I realized, because I was caught up in other games, that, oh, damn, Vanderbilt, they have a chance. And they didn't just have a chance. If you watch the game, they went toe-to-toe and took care of business, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think a lot of the casual college football fans were watching that game from like kickoff in the first quarter, right? You know what I mean? Like
I wasn't.
There's a couple generations of empirical evidence where you don't need to build your day around Vanderbilt, Alabama. So I actually went to the Stanford, Virginia. Yeah, I went to the Stanford, Virginia Tech game because I had the full day in the Bay and I was staying out there for the day. So me and Stanford Steve popped in a car about an hour after the show and drove over there. Talk about feeling like you're at the wrong game. Right. Stanford, it was a little sad, I'll be honest. It was just empty there. It was like 110 degrees. So everybody was like scattered in the shade. So there's probably more that it looked empty because people were just trying to stay out of getting baked in the sun. But Stanford is rebuilding. Virginia Tech is decent, not great, but it was not. It was just. You were probably there for some of those Christian McCaffrey, Andrew Luck, Kevin Hogan years, and look. Stanford's never going to be LSU at night, Ryan, but it was, it had some juice and there was some big game flair. And that was, so anyway, I was there. I left around halftime, and that's about halftime of that game. And that's when I was like, oh, put this game up on my phone. I got to start paying attention. And I think the thing I'll remember about that game the most, other than our friend Alyssa Lang's unbelievable post-game interview with Diego Pavia, where he thanked God and then started cursing.
Yeah, this is all about God's timeline, and now we're going to get effing turned.
It's literally all God's timing, literally from the jump. God gave me a vision when I was a little kid, and He don't let that. And He promises it's God's timeline. I'm super thankful for guys like Eli Sowers. Man, that kid's incredible. The red varsity, look at this. Get it.
He's my favorite player in college football. He is unbelievable. But I do think the key, because look, college football is riddled with double-digit halftime leads, and Vanderbilt's had a few, right? Like, it's hard to pull the upset because talent gravity eventually catches up to you, and then if you're not in a program that's accustomed to winning, there's always learning how to win. But I thought Pavia was the reason for the upset, A, B, and C. But I do think they put him in position to keep making plays. There was never a time where I felt, oh God, they went in the fetal position. They knew they had to keep scoring to win, and they called the plays accordingly. They were daring but not foolish. And I really thought it was an impressive job by Clark Lee, by Tim Beck, and by Pavia, who has a lot of autonomy at the line of scrimmage, as Tom Hart told us during the broadcast, to just keep the pedal down. Don't play scared. And they earned it because of that. So many upset bids are just that, because teams get conservative and they invite everybody back in. And in honor of Reese, because it was his favorite play call of 2023, did you notice the Alabama play on the goal line when they scored on 4th and 1 with the receiver running around was the same play that Washington ran in the Apple Cup, Kalen DeBoer, last year on their own 29?
Yes.
I thought that was a nice touch. Like, the Onions have gone to Tuscaloosa. And if they had one, that play call would be remembered like the other one. It sort of got lost somewhere along the goalposts floating through the, what river is that in Tennessee? You know your Southern geography.
Oh, yeah. No, it's the Cumberland. Tennessee fans watched that game and were kind of like, all right, well, that's good for Vanderbilt, whatever. And then they got kind of angry because throwing the goalpost in the river is Tennessee's thing, which is what they did just about 2 years ago when they played Alabama, and they threw theirs in the Tennessee River. And Vanderbilt did that, and Tennessee fans were mad about that. And then suddenly Tennessee fans realized they need to be mad about something else. They need to focus otherwise, which we'll get into. And by the way, we're always looking for our candidate for best in game. And I think, for me, best in game is Diego Pavia. And I'm glad the nation's kind of catching up with him a little bit and learning about him, because I just wrote about this in the bottom 10, because they just, 2 weekends ago, played the New Mexico State game. And yes, for you super hardcore fans, which most of you are, this is the quarterback who got in trouble because the video leaked of Diego Pavia at New Mexico State.
Leaked it did, Ryan. Leaked it did.
Yeah, leaked it, urinating on the New Mexico logo in the practice facility because they were in the bowl game there in town. And I think it's a super underrated rivalry, because I've covered a lot because of the bottom 10. But yeah, that's him. Mm-hmm. But he's just, you can hate it, you can love it, but there is no lack of personality. And prior to the game, Vanderbilt on their social media had even posted video of Pavia's family's tailgate. And that looked like one of the greatest tailgate scenes in the SEC, which is no small accomplishment, having no idea that 4 hours later, he would be the hero of the world.
They kept flashing to the in the crew. Tom Hart and Cole Kubelik and Alyssa did a great job. They were there for the moment. They'd met it. They really did an excellent job chronicling it. But they kept showing Pavia's family, which was great TV. One dude had his shirt off. Like, those guys were going to have a good time in Nashville that night. There was no doubt about that. Our old friend Pat Forty has a great name for Pavia. They have discussed the urination incident for quite a long time on my old podcast there on Yahoo. They call him the Albuquerque Tinkler.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like it's just it's.
I would buy a T-shirt.
Great.
Well, yes. All right. So the flip side of that, which is Alabama, trap games are trap games are trap games. They always have been. They always will be. I've talked about this preseason about looking at Georgia's schedule, and the games that I was not worried about for Georgia were the ones with teams that had, rankings next to their names. I looked at the fact that they had Kentucky sitting where they're sitting, or they had Auburn and their old rival sitting where they're sitting. And it's just, to me, those are the dangerous games. Now, I didn't see Vanderbilt coming, but if you're Alabama, I mean, the context of winning a game that on Marty and McGee on Saturday, we both sat there and said openly, one of the greatest games ever played. Not prisoner of the moment.
Oh, sure.
One of the greatest games we've ever witnessed in my lifetime. And to go from that to losing at Vanderbilt, which is still a half-constructed stadium, and oh, by the way, the same night that Nate Bargatze's hosting SNL, Vanderbilt's like easily their biggest fan, which I thought about that immediately. Yeah, and at the very end of his goodbye, all of a sudden Bargatze like did the flex, and he goes, "We beat Alabama." That's how SNL ended. But for Alabama to go from one of the greatest games ever played to a loss that the numbers start coming out, and we're seeing stuff that happened in 1932 and stuff that happened in 1921 and stuff that hasn't happened since 1978, to go from 1 week to the next week, it's why we love the game. But Pete, for Alabama, what does that mean going forward? Because there were guys literally throwing elementary school temper tantrums at that last penalty of the game. He just, if you watch the ISO, he's just walking around, literally just like crying, and walks over and kicks a football. Like their brains were not processing what was going on.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think the issues there are on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like, I think if we met up at halftime of the Alabama Georgia game, we would have talked about how impressed we were with Alabama's defense and where they were. And since that time, they've given up 60 something points, and has just basically been what does Coach Saban say? Like crap through a tin can. I mean, people just run through them. Isn't that the old Southern colloquialism? And it's a little bit of a woe there. I will say this, that personnel wise, there was always going to be an issue with this Alabama defense. I did one of those scouting breakdowns around a couple weeks ago. When you look up front, they have good players, but they don't have the type of Alabama defensive fronts that they have had in recent years. They have good plugger defensive tackles who probably will be back-end roster guys in the NFL, but they don't have linchpin first-round pick maul you in that starting lineup on the defensive line. They just don't have the same caliber of talent they've had there. If there was one position group during Nick Saban's time there that was numbingly consistent, it was in that front four. They would bring guys off the bench getting drafted, right? So I really think that's where everything changed. And you combine that with the secondary, which Coach Saban's been pretty open since media days, that's where he was most worried about. We started to see some of that in the Georgia game. And look, there's Damani Jackson's a transfer, Keon Savage. There was some unknown there, and they played pretty well early, to give them credit. But when the competition has come up, and I think opposing defenses get a feel for them, there's some vulnerabilities there. And I thought first of all, quick hat tip to Clark Lee, right? In spring meetings this year, and talking to him, I was like, "Hey, is this your most talented team?" And he was like, by far. And it's indicative of the opportunity that the portal brings. I think they brought in 22 portal guys. They needed upgrades everywhere. I think it's interesting that the two most notable package deals for OC and quarterback have really been program changer. You think about Washington State hiring Eric Morris, bringing Cam Ward from Incarnate Word, now as a head coach quarterback, but he's the play caller, and he came to Washington State to be the OC. That changed everything for Cam Ward, right? Reset his trajectory. That changed everything for Washington State. They played in a lot of big games and, got 2 years of great productivity out of them. And Clark knew he needed to blow up the, obviously needed to blow up the offense. They were ineffective. They didn't win a league game last year. And he, went and said, hey, we're going to come and we're going to bring this. And that's, that's the key to this happening. But to go back to Bama, and I bring up the Clark Lee point for this. I thought the best comment on this game came from Chris Doering on the SEC network, where he said, modern college football, the elite teams aren't as good as they used to be, and the bad teams aren't as bad as they used to be.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Because you can, like Ohio State's done, you can cherry pick top players in the portal, but you're losing your second tier depth, and you're particularly vulnerable in those top 5 teams because the guys that used to be 4 stars who'd wait their turn now say, forget it, we're going somewhere else to get playing time. And if you're at a place like Vanderbilt and they have a pretty healthy NIL budget, give them credit, they've started to commit. They were a little late to the game on NIL. They now have a functional SEC roster. And look, they're a couple kicks away at Missouri and a couple late plays away at Georgia State from being like, whoa, they're ranked pretty high. Now they're not, and they were in those mud fights and lost. But I really feel like, we're at an interesting point for a struggling Alabama defense, which, oh, by the way, in 2 weeks is going to have to go to Knoxville, where some pretty good Alabama defense. You and I remember I don't have to remind you, Ryan, got chopped up pretty good there a couple years back. So it's an interesting moment, and man, the sport delivers.
Yeah, well, Clark Lee is. I love the stories of the guys that. I mean, listen, the only job Clark Lee has ever wanted in his life is to be the head football coach of Vanderbilt. And for folks that don't know, he was a tremendous defensive player at Vanderbilt. And the conversations that I've had with him are about that passion. And it always breaks my heart when you see a former player, someone who grew up there, that's all they wanted to do, they have the job and it doesn't work out, like Matt Luke at Ole Miss, right?
Sure.
And you root for those guys because that's the only job they've ever wanted. And it's the only job their families ever wanted. And it's the only job their dad ever wanted. And they played there and you want it to work. And when Clark Lee first started there, and 2 years ago, and the first conversations that we all had with him, I remember went to the podium at the SEC media days and immediately started, we can win a national championship. He started talking, we can win the SEC. And the room,
we're going to be the best team in the country.
And the room kind of chuckled. And he doubled down and said it all day long. And then this last year, he brought it up when he sat down with Marty Smith and myself, and he brought it up without us bringing it up. He said, I probably shouldn't have said that 2 years ago. And he goes, that's a guy that was trying to make a mark. He said, now I realize the work that has to go on. And it's because he was humbled last year. Yeah. And because he saw the measuring stick for real last year where they didn't win a conference game and got off to a pretty good start and then fell apart. Yeah. And so for him to have a moment, and I think you're sitting in Fayetteville, Arkansas right now. Mm-hmm. Sam Pittman is a guy that I root for just as a human being. And
how can't you?
I had to sit in front of the Little Rock Touchdown Club last November and say, unfortunately, I think he's gone. And I hate it because they really believed he was gone. And for him to have his moment, it's just you don't root for teams, you don't root all those things, but you do root for good people, and you do root for people that are trying to do it the right way. And you talking about post-game interviews, tracking down Sam Pittman and the emotion that was in his, he's a quote machine, but all the times that Arkansas has been close, and they have, and for them to finally win it and not win it in a shootout, Pete. I mean, not win it because, Petrino was working it. If you watch the game, you know it. But the reality was they grinded their way through that game and stopped the Tennessee offense, which people talking about winning national championships. And so I was happy for Sam. Now, I've said that my wife probably never speaks to him again, born and raised in Knoxville. But the reality is you are happy for him. But now you have questions about Tennessee. The one thing you thought, all right, they're going to score. The question is, well, they're good. And, is there a roadmap now of, all right, Alabama, all right, everyone that's facing Tennessee in giant game, Georgia in the next couple of months, if you're Tennessee, what do you do with this? Because I don't know that I was all in on them as they going to win the national championship, but I certainly was all in on them as a top 10 team.
Yeah, it was hard to not see them in the playoff at the end of September. I think that was a fair way to characterize it. But I do think with this modern parity we're in, like, losses are going to happen. Like, you lose games in the NFC West. It's sort of that vibe, and the sport has changed where losses are hard and they're bad, but they're not apocalyptic. They're not like your hopes and dreams require perfection as it used to be. Let me put a bow on the Clark Lee, and you mentioned the sort of the palpable tie between player and school. I texted him yesterday and just said, "Hey, congrats!" And he said, very Clark Lee, who's a bit of a square in a good way, right? Yeah. Like, he's an earnest guy. Happy for our community to have the chance to celebrate. We deserve that. We've had some struggles the last couple of years, and those moments make it all worthwhile. I thought that was a very Clark Lee way to sum it up. Not looking at himself, happy for all the fans, all the people. Like, they've, prior to him certainly, but they've endured a lot of tough seasons. They've had some tough decades, So when you see a school like that just defy all statistics, meet its moment, they get their viral moment by playing the Vanderbilt's the only easy to play in the SEC clip that Coach Saban said to Pat McAfee on his show at some point in the last few weeks. I from what I heard, they just played it over and over again. A-grade trolling. Some stadium ops guy should be getting some backslaps at the water cooler in Nashville this morning, or gal. It was that's what makes it great, man. You just never know what's going to arise on these Saturdays. You just, Berkeley's like insane, right? And it's just like the places that pop up on the radar and have their moment make this so cool.
Well, and we are living in, for everything that we all hate about social media, right? I mean, I wrote a NASCAR column I know you didn't read, but I'm just getting destroyed on social media. And so you have those times where you're just like, why do we even do this? But then you have the algorithm, right? Which, by the way, a great story about Cal Bonagera about that on ESPN.
He did a great job.
And talking about great jobs, best in game might be the scoreboard, stadium atmosphere people, because so while Arkansas is storming the field, they're playing Rocky Top at the highest possible decibel. and it was, and you tip your cap because it's it's just, there's pain, but there's also like, all right, so I was at Texas A&M, and for folks that don't know, Brady Cook, the quarterback from Missouri, who I like very much, he said during his media availability earlier in the week, what we basically said was, he was asked about going into Kyle Field, how loud is it going to be? He's just going to be loud, but he said, honestly, I think practice is probably louder, because we got the speakers right behind our ears. And it wasn't an unfair thing that he said, but we ran that on Marty McGee in front of a live crowd on Saturday morning. And that crowd, I mean, they were so angry about it. And literally, I was there for the first half of the game. They played that quote on the video board over and over and over again. And every time they would play
didn't realize
it was like turning the volume knob just a little bit higher. So props to the scoreboard, so the stadium atmosphere people, because it was, I mean, the troll game all the way down to Lane Kiffin leaving Williams-Brice Stadium with his Judicus. So Juice Gardner, the great wide receiver who transferred to Ole Miss, they're selling T-shirts. They're selling T-shirts with calling him Judas.
Yeah,
and that's what Lane Kiffin wore walking out to the bus after the game. So it's, we're living in, and no one's feelings are really hurt, because you're just kind of like, what? All right, fair enough. And so we are living in the high holy days of digital trash talk, and it's why it's the greatest game in the world.
Can I ask you a football question?
Yeah.
How do you think Weigman looked seeing him live on the field in the first half?
He looked great in warm-ups. We actually, Marty and I were on the field during warm-ups, and we're literally standing right next to him and watching Colin Klein, walk 30 inches off his shoulder the entire pregame, and he was spinning it. there was what I was concerned about going into the game was he looked great in warm-ups, but what do you do when you get hurt or when you get hit? And he was throwing really, really over the top, like sailing it a little bit. But he looked good. He looked like and his defense obviously did him great favors in this game because they gave him some room to. But he looked good. He looked good physically. He looked better than I thought he was going to. And he was very much strictly a game time decision because Colin. I mean, it was Colin Klein told us. He said we're watching him, and we're going to pull the trigger on this. I mean, in the next 10 minutes, and that was it.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a noon kick, and that was at 11:40. So but I thought he looked good.
Yeah. No, I was just curious because I think that's it sort of jump started an interesting decision for Mike Elko because Marcel Reed was a good player. He led 3 games, and Conner Weigman has been a good player at Texas A&M, but you could see that there was a debate. It wasn't a no-brainer decision for A&M to bring him back and start him, and them sort of quickly inserting him, making him a game time and going, I think saved a bunch of debate, right? And now I think it's pretty obvious that they're going to roll with Weigman, but it was a bit of a risk to be honest, Ryan. If they sputtered on offense again and then went to Reed, then you have like a full blown quarterback controversy. So credit to Conner Weigman, who you have to feel for, right? Comes in as this ballyhooed 5-star. And just has never been able to have a consistent period of health so we could really see, how talented he is. And so, I think that must have been his best career game, right? I didn't go study the rest of them, but like that was as good of a statement game as he's had. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I give him credit too, because I'm always curious to watch these guys when they are in that crock pot. And literally everyone in that stadium, like there was one section of the sideline during pregame that had literally 900 people in it, and the rest of the stadium was empty on the sideline. And it was it was scouts, and it was us, and it was I mean, all the recruits were all standing there. Everyone was watching him, and I thought he handled it extremely well. And when the game was over with, he was very even strain, man. Just stick to the game plan and take care of business. And the reality was that game was over quick. I mean, it was you know the deal. You can tell in the stadium pretty quick. Within 4 drives, we're like, oh, this is over. We can go to the airport because it just and Missouri was just flat. They looked like a team that hadn't played anyone, which is what they were.
Sure.
But it was now I was impressed with him and very quietly. So listen, obviously we're talking about all these top 10 teams losing, and rightfully so. But I am almost more fascinated right now by these one-loss teams that I don't know how good they are. I mean, it's basically the entire ACC, right? Except for Clemson and Miami, which I thought Miami was going to be one of those teams. Obviously we all did headed into the fourth quarter at Berkeley, but I am, the Texas A&Ms, the Ole Misses, and now you throw your Alabamas and Tennessees and all that, but we're getting into this field of one-loss teams, and I don't know how good they are, and even a couple undefeated teams. I mean, BYU's still sitting there, Army Navy's still sitting there, but we're going to find out in the next couple of weeks. Probably not with Army Navy, but everyone else, we're going to find out in the next couple of weeks how good they really are, and those are the teams I'm fascinated by, because now we know what we learned last weekend was, because everybody's kind of as good as your first 22, those one-loss teams could either vanish or they could pull a Syracuse and ruin the season for you. It's just I'm really, really fascinated by that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I do think we're now in the place where the one-loss teams become much more interesting, whereas opposed to in other generations of college football, you lose once and BCS era on, you're just kind of thrown on the pile. Hey, maybe if everything falls their way, they can sneak back in and be the 4th team. But now I think it in some ways the loss becomes like an energy jolt, saying, hey, we can't, we need to roll here and go, or then. And I do think we'll see a 3-loss team in the playoff. I don't think that's crazy. That's crazy talk. So I don't think a second loss disqualifies you, but a second loss certainly puts you on the brink where you need, a hallmark win. You need something to balance those. You can't just get. I hope you can't just get in the playoff with good losses, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like, I hope you have to have multiple marquee wins. And losses are understandable. They're going to happen. The way college football is designed right now, there's going to be good teams with losses. There are going to be good teams with multiple losses. I still do think winning has to be a big part of the equation in the formula. You can't just sort of beat all the teams you're supposed to, lose to the good teams, and go. I think there has to be some sort of showcase on the resume. But that's where we're starting to peer into now. But if you look in the top 25 at one-loss teams that are pretty compelling right now, I think we can say SMU in the ACC, right? Like they have one loss, and they could certainly be in that ACC title. Right? That was a heck of a win at Louisville. It's a very good Louisville team, hard place to play. I thought that was a huge statement win for that for that program. And you got Missouri. Like, do they pack it in, or do they respond? The schedule still remains favorable for them. K-State has a huge showcase Saturday night in Boulder. Oklahoma can flip the narrative if they can get some Red River magic. I don't love their personnel, and the signs point to that game being lopsided, but Red River's a funny game now. You know that, right? Wacky things have happened in that game. Boise has a loss. I would argue that's as good of a loss as you can have for a group of 5 team. You go in and you play Oregon toe to toe, and you show you can play with a top team. I think that's going to help them. Utah's a fascinating one-loss team. We're going to get Cam Rising back. That goes back to the front of the burner again. A&M, there's a path too. So we can go on and on. Whereas, Notre Dame, LSU, Clemson, fascinating one-loss team that I think has really done a great job reasserting themselves with multiple dominant victories in a row. And then you go to the SEC crew: Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. Like, those are all, still
LSU, right?
Yeah.
Who are you? Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
It's what I took away from this past weekend was I see hope in the fact that the teams that we believe are much better than everyone else still struggle. And I take that into the playoff, because my biggest concern about a 12-team playoff is that I have no problem with inclusion. I think it's great. What I worry about is that there's not going to be enough inclusion when it comes to, gang of 5 schools, but that's a whole other conversation. But
you got to look out for your bottom 10 guys.
Yeah, I have to. It's my people, my college kids, right? I got to look out for them. But I take away hope from week 7 that when we get to the playoff, we could be served up some chaos in the first and second rounds, because what we have learned with the playoff is that it's a fight of, well, who should have gotten in, but then when it's over with, the 2 best teams go and make the championship anyway, and the ones that we expected. Even in the BCS era, there's a debate about who the 3rd best team was, but for the most part, with the exception of a couple of years, we had the 2 best teams are winning question. And then when we get the playoff, we have all these blowout semifinals, right? So my hope is, particularly when we're expanding, we're adding 2 rounds, is that we're going to get some of this in those rounds, which is, an 11-1, 12-1, whatever team that we think is pretty good, or a 2-loss team that we think is pretty good. I want to see them succeed. And so week 7 to me gave me a little bit of hope about the playoff, because what I don't want is I don't want everyone to go chalk, which I feel like, based on the model that we've seen with the playoff, that's kind of what we would have had. The team that really screamed and yelled because they got left out of the playoff, guys that sat out, whatever, they laid an egg in the bowl game. And so what I want week 7 when we get to the middle of December.
Yeah, I think that's an admirable goal, and I think it'll happen. I think my worry the next 2 years is that group of 5 team and how they perform in that game.
Yep.
Because I just do think the gravity of the sport is going to make that inclusion a little bit vulnerable. With all the pull-ups and all the call-ups, it's going to be harder and harder to have a dominant group of 5 team. Now, Ashton Jeanty deserves a ton of credit, like a ton of credit. He is a top 3 player in college football this year, and he had high 6-figure offers to go anywhere he wanted, SEC and beyond. I mean, NFL people are in love with him. He's a dynamic tailback. He was actually a receiver in high school. The tailback in front of him at Lone Star High School in Texas ended up at Oklahoma State. I think he's at Central Michigan now. He ended up being a good player. Like if you have a tailback in your high school in Texas, you got a tailback who goes to Oklahoma State and plays, real reps for a bunch of years. That's a really good player. And so Jeanty played the slot, and the story of Jeanty is that he is such a diverse player now because he had that year playing receiver. Then he goes to tailback. So Boise offered him kind of as a slot, but they brought him up during COVID. You could have visits and you could work guys out on campus because you couldn't go recruit them. And they worked him out as a running back. And Tim Plow, who's the OC at UC Davis, told me this story. He was the OC at Boise at the time. He did 2 reps, and they hadn't offered him yet. And they brought him there, and they were going to look at him. He did 2 reps, and everybody looked at each other. It's like, he's good. We can offer him.
Start pulling out the paperwork. Yeah.
You don't have to
here's a hoodie, please. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you can come. You can play tailback. You can go because just the way he burst and the way he cut, and you see it on all these highlights, right, is so rare. They knew exactly what they had. When he got to high school, Ryan, he had been in Italy. He's got a military family. He had bounced around. I think he was in Jacksonville, maybe in Virginia, and then he spent some of his junior high years in Italy. So when he got to school, I believe it's in Frisco, Texas, they said, we get this kid coming from Italy. They thought he was coming from Italy, Texas, like the school down the road. Because you've driven by Italy, Texas, the signs were on the highway. It's kind of near Waco and Ennis and somewhere around.
Oh,
yeah. So they thought he was coming from some certain, and then he shows up and they're like, oh, this is a real guy, and he's from the other Italy. So, but I'm anyway. I went on a little tangent.
No. Well, I want to say too, Tim Tebow during Marty McGee on Saturday, literally physically stood up out of his seat to campaign for Ashton Jeanty for the Heisman Trophy.
Wow!
And said that if he said that if he was turning in his ballot today, that Jeanty would be number 1, and to him it wasn't even close. And my response was, "You're just saying this because the kid lived in Jacksonville for a little while." He's like, "No," and he went through a whole thing and had done his research. But if he takes care of business on the stages that he's been given, then we all talk about September Heismans and October Heismans, but I think he should go to New York if we're turning our ballots right now.
Yeah.
As a finalist for sure. But Tim Tebow, who has a vote, is very familiar with the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I wanted to be there 3 times. He was stumping for Jeanty, big. And so I think there's real momentum there. And we'll see. But again, week 7 gives me hope for the playoff, because what I don't want us to get our 12 teams and everybody go chalk in the first 2 rounds, and now we just essentially have a 14 playoff because it's the 4 teams we expected. So I'm hoping that we get chaos, and week 7 tells me that perhaps that might happen.
Yeah, no, I think we're well poised for it. Just the feeling at the end of the day. So I'll just make another confession. We talked last week about how I left Alabama, Georgia at halftime. I left Cal Miami at halftime, and not only did I leave early, I went to bed at the start of the 3rd quarter because I've been up since 3 a.m, and I was tired, and I had a 6 a.m. flight the next day, and it's like something's got to give, and it was 35-7. The probability of me staying up for 25-point 4th quarter comeback or whatever it was not high. So when I woke up very early to go catch my flight out of FSO, I texted Kyle Bonagora, our reporter who was covering the game, and I said, I'm on a heater leaving games and they become epic all-time finishes. Because I remember my wife and I left BC Michigan State in the rain the other day. Now again, that wasn't Alabama Georgia, but it was a good game and a good finish.
It was a great game. Yeah,
I was like, you want to leave now? Like when it's tie game and they're driving down the field, and I was like,
they're going to start announcing it. No, they're going to start. Ladies and gentlemen, Pete Thamel has left the building. Everyone be ready.
If I leave your game, be ready for an instant. Headed
to the airport. So. Dig in. Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel any better, it was my wife's birthday, and I got home from College Station, and I had to write. I write scripts for the week, and I'd already written a little bit of a pitch for a script for next week, and I was talking about all the top 10 teams that had lost, and spoiler alert, when I sent the script in, I included Miami on the list, and I went to bed. My wife and I birthday party, went to bed.
Yep.
And woke up Sunday morning and went, I need to revise that script because the Bears lost. But so if it makes you feel any better, I didn't leave the stadium. but I did turn the television off.
Yeah. So I got a text from Kyle and he was like, another one, exclamation point. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, they won. And then of course you're like on the phone, like scrambling to try to catch up. And then you look at the box score on ESPN.com on your phone. It's like Miami touchdown, Miami touchdown, Miami touchdown. And then I was just like, poor Reese, his voice must have been shot trying to keep up with that.
I want to see framed in your office the next time you're home when we do this. I want to see framed in your office the printed out box scores, and I want you to, with a red Sharpie mark, this is when Pete left.
Yeah,
and then the epic comebacks of all time. So yeah, so when the playoff starts, whatever game you're attending, we're all going to need you to leave at halftime because that will ensure we get some Week 7 games.
I do really like football. I don't like to leave games. It's just sort of like reality of hours and travel and all that stuff. So
tired is tired.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid. My dad, to beat the traffic, we left the McDonald's All-American game in Springfield, Mass. early, and it ended up being this like great finish, and I missed it. And I was like, I'm never going to do that. And like, here I am. Like,
Well. This, my dad was a college football official, and there were a lot of really big games particularly bowl games, where we would have a handler that would take care of the families, like take us to our seats and all that stuff.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, it was the 1990 Orange Bowl, Notre Dame and Colorado. Colorado's number 1. Notre Dame was trying to win a national championship. This is not the clip game, the Rocket Ismail game, because if it had been that game, my dad wouldn't have called that clip. That's a whole story. But in 90, Notre Dame's driving. And it's a classic, Lou Holtz, Tony Rice, 18-play drive. And they get in the red zone, and the handler goes, okay, we got to go. And my brother and I go, well, then we're missing the damn bus because we're not leaving. I was like, we ended up watching the end of that game standing in the tunnel. I'm like, we're not leaving. I'm a kid. I'm like, we're not leaving. What are you talking about? So yeah, but no, I feel it. Well, people are always shocked when they see Marty and myself bolt into the airport, at halftime of these games where we're doing Marty McGee and SEC Nation. But the reality is we're trying to get home so we can watch the other games. And also we like being married. So that's how that goes.
That is a big part of that. And in your mid 40s, when you sleep like 3 hours a night, it does catch up to you a little more than maybe it did in your 20s. So.
Yeah, I used to be king of the red eye, Pete, and I can't do it anymore. I'm just junk. So, but hey, we appreciate you, and we appreciate you making time for us today. And we will, you're going to go home for like 4 hours and kiss everybody, and then get on a plane, head back to the West Coast.
There we are. Can't wait.
Hey, Beat's having a real job.
Oh,
thank y'all. Yeah. Amen. And pass the potato salad. But thank y'all for listening to the College Game Day Podcast. Please subscribe, download wherever you prefer to get your podcasts. And just keep listening. And as soon as Reese gets his voice back, he'll be on here too.